Hello, everybody. Welcome to another class with Web Yeshiva. I'm David Sedley. We are continuing our series on the Shemoneh Esrei in depth. Today, I'll be speaking about two of the berachot together. And I think it makes sense to speak about the two together because they are very connected, as we will see. So let us begin. I have some questions. So when we look at the versions we'll look at the two berachot. Both of them mention Mashiach. So why should we have two separate berachot mentioning Mashiach? It seems redundant. And also, I guess I'm not going to directly answer this question, but I think it's possibly implicit. The men of the Great Assembly, we said that the men of the Great Assembly composed the Amida originally, and they came back from Bavel, rebuilt the second temple. So why would they be praying for the rebuilding of Jerusalem if they themselves were rebuilding Jerusalem? They'd come back to Jerusalem. And I'm going to leave that as food for thought. Maybe the answer is obvious, maybe it's not. And then if we're praying in the other brachot, we're supposed to hishtadlut. We're supposed to, ask God for help, but we're also supposed to do what we can to make those prayers come true. For example, I don't know, if you pray for healing for somebody, that's not in place of going to the doctor. You also go to the doctor. If you're praying for parnasa, that's not in place of getting a job or doing whatever you need to do to get money. That's praying God to help you with that. If you pray for wisdom, that's not instead of trying to do efforts yourself to become wise, but that supplements it. So the question is, if we're praying for God to rebuild Jerusalem, does that mean we are supposed to rebuild Jerusalem? Or, maybe we can't for technical reasons, but are we supposed to be engaged in the endeavor of trying to rebuild Jerusalem? And finally, we're praying at Tzemach David for Mashiach. So I just want to talk a little bit who is Mashiach. I'm sure you all know more about Mashiach than about many other topics, but there's some interesting Gemaras that I'd like to learn with you. Okay, so again, we usually start with Megillah 17b, which goes through the 18/19 brachot, and talks about why they're placed next to each other. So after talking about the tzaddikim and justice, righteousness, the Gemara asks, "Hechan mitromem karnam," where will the horn of righteousness be raised? Birushalayim, in Jerusalem. Shenemar sha'alu shalom Yerushalayim yishlayu avayach. Ask the priests of Jerusalem, and those who love you will prosper. So that's why Jerusalem comes after the prayer for the tzaddikim. And then, Kevin Shenivnat Jerusalem, Bar David, once Jerusalem has been rebuilt, David will come. Shene'amar, Acha Yeshuva b'nei Yisrael bikshu et Hashem Elokim ve'et David malkam. After the Jews return, and they seek their God and David their king. Now, we'll see that really, I think building Jerusalem is as much about building the temple, and that it's Mashiach's job to build the temple. So the order of this is a little bit strange. You might have thought Mashiach should come first and then rebuild Jerusalem. So it's interesting. The Gemara says no, first Jerusalem and then David will come, but it's not speaking necessarily, or may not be speaking about the temple. So the wording of the blessing, I think you're familiar with this. Right? Jerusalem, your city, please return to it. Dwell in it as you said. And build it speedily in our days, an eternal building. And put the throne of David speedily inside it. Blessed are you, God, who builds Jerusalem. This is the Ashkenazi and Sephard version. I'll talk about different versions soon. And then Mashiach was a Tzimach David Avdecha Mer Tatzmiach, right? The flowering, the sprout of David, your servant, may he quickly sprout, flourish. V'karnotron bishuatecha, and may his horn be raised in your salvation. Ki lishuatcha kivinu kol yom, because we have awaited your salvation every day, all the day. Baruch atah Hashem atzmiach ken Yeshua, blessed you God who causes the Mashiach salvation to sprout. Fine, those are the two blessings. And you see they're both, right, this one clearly talks about Mashiach, and this one also says, may you Kisei David may you build a throne for David, put David on his throne. So there's a repetition there. So does the blessing for Jerusalem, or did it, or should it, also include the blessing for Mashiach and David? And here we're going to look at some different nuschot, right? I showed you the Ashkenazi version. The Sephardi version is different. Instead of beginning Vil Yerushalayim, parenthetically, one of the things I decided not to speak about is why the blessing begins with a Vav in the Ashkenazi rite. Usually, where every bracha stands by itself, except for Velamal Shanim, which is an addition. All of the other brachot stand by themselves, but Vil Yerushalayim sounds like, and Jerusalem is added on to the previous one, which is odd. The Sephardi version of the prayer does not have that issue, so I decided not to speak about it. But anyway, so Eidos Mizrach say Tishkom b'toch Yerushalayim Yerachak asher dibarta, dwell in Jerusalem, your city like you spoke. V'kisei David avdecha me'at b'toch hatachin, and prepare the throne of David speedily inside it. U'bnei otah binyan olam b'mirav yameinu, build it speedily. Baruch Hashem b'nei Yerushalayim. So the order of the words is different, but fundamentally it's the same idea. That's Ashkenazi, Sephardi, most of the modern nuschot that you might be familiar with. However, if you daven in a Yemenite shul, you'll see, or open a Yemenite siddur, you'll see the following nusach. Tishkon b'toch Yerushalayim yirchak asher dibarta, dwell in Jerusalem, your city, like you spoke. Or v'nei otah binyan olam b'mirav yameinu, and rebuild it speedily in our days. Baruch atah Hashem bonei Yerushalayim. Or if you go to an Italian shul, if you're in Rome, and you go to shul there, or you go to the Italian shul on Hillel Street in Jerusalem, it says kind of more similar to the Ashkenazi one because it begins with Vel Yerushalayim Ircha rather than Tachon, but it says Yerushalayim Ircha Barachim Tashuv, or V'nei Osah Binyan Olam B'mirav Yameinu. Your Jerusalem, your city, please return and rebuild it speedily. Baruch Hashem Bonei Yerushalayim. So I asked Claude AI what the difference is between these two, between the Ashkenazi Sephardi version and the Yemenite Italian version, in case you didn't pick it up yourselves. The key differences are the additional phrase that the Ashkenazi Sephardi version includes the phrase Chisei David Me'ara Tocha Tachina, prepare the throne of David quickly within it. Right, this reference to David's throne adds a messianic dimension to the prayer, alluding to the Davidic lineage and the hope of restoration. And then you also have variations, Bekarov B'Yameinu, B'Mirav Yameinu, etc. And the Ashkenazi Sephardi version that most people use is more elaborate and poetic, more detailed messianic imagery. But fundamentally, the difference between them is that the Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Edom Mizrach version of the prayer includes a prayer for Mashiach, and the Yemenite and Italian ones do not include a prayer for David. So in answer to my question, why do we include David in both blessings? The answer is not everybody does. And maybe, even though it's the majority, maybe I think our version is the corrupted version. If we look in the Cairo Geniza, there's a different version, different than either of those other versions, which says, Rachem Hashem Elokeinu b'rachamecha rabim al Yisrael amecha v'al Yerushalayim yirecha v'al tzeh mishkan kavodecha v'al hechalecha v'al ma'onecha. So have mercy, God, on your city, your temple, Zion, your palace, etc., etc. Ve'al malchut beit David Mashiach tzidkecha, and on David your Mashiach. Baruch atah Hashem Elokei David bonei Yerushalayim. Blessed are you, God, King of David and builder of Jerusalem. So what you see here is what I'm going to speak about now. This is the segue, that the two brachot were at some point one bracha, and then became separated into two. Right? The ending here, Elokei David Bonei Yerushalayim, is clearly two separate brachot. Nowadays, two brachot of Mashiach and building Jerusalem. So is it supposed to be one blessing or two? Well, that depends. Let's look. You might have to hold on a bit here. I don't know, Maya, when the Karuganiza dates from. I think it's, I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know if that was in the Sachet Israel. And equally, I don't really know when the Ashkenazi and Sephardi versions date from. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer. Maybe someone can Google that and see, but I don't know. So I want to make a distinction between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, and look at different texts from both countries, different communities, different ideas, and see whether this prayer should be one prayer or two. So the Yerushalmi and Tainit says, Reb Levi Amar Keneged Shmoneh Esrei Shekatav B'Havu L'Hashem B'nei Elim. We have 18 blessings in our Amida, corresponding to the 18 times God's name appears in the psalm that begins Havu L'Hashem B'nei Elim. That's similar to the Bavli. You're familiar with that. Amar Rav Huna Im Yomar Lacha Adam Shiva Asar Hein. Rabbi Chuna says, if somebody tells you there's only 17 blessings in the Amida, Amor Lahem Shalminim Kfar Kavua Chachamim B'Yavne. Sorry, V'Shelaminim. Tell them they already added the blessing of V'Lamalshanim in Yavne. Now, I think we talked about this on the first or second share of the series, but in case you've forgotten or weren't there. So there was the question is, why are there 18 and not 17? The answer is because V'Lamalshanim was added in Yavne. Right? Hitiv Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Yossi, Komi Rabbi Yossi, v'Haktiv El Kvod Hirim, Amar La v'Hatani Kol Shalomini v'Poshim b'Machni Zedim. So Rabbi Yossi asks a question. Rabbi Elazar asks a question and says, "There's an extra name of God in this psalm," and the answer then is that the Malshnim Poshim, all the kinds of evildoers are included in Mechni Zedim. The elders and the converts are included in the blessing of tzaddikim. And the prayer for David is included in the prayer for Yerushalayim. Right, that's explicitly what we're talking about now. If you say that, then you have enough for one of God's names for each of these berachot. Meaning, in Eretz Yisrael, Tzemach David and Bonei Yerushalayim were one bracha and not two, like we saw in the Cairo Geniza. Tosefta also in the also from Eretz Yisrael, Shemoneh Esrei she'amru chachamim keneged Shemoneh Esrei askrot shebavu Hashem b'nei Elim. So again, the 18 blessings correspond to the 18 times God's name is mentioned in this psalm. For Koel Shomenim B'Shel Prushim, you include the heretics in the blessing of the Prushim, the Pharisees. Shel Gerim B'Shel Zkinim, you include the blessing of converts in the blessing of the elders, right? And Tzadikim. B'Shel David B'Yerushalayim, and you include the blessing of David in the blessing of Yerushalayim. But if you want to separate them out and say them separately, Yatza. So the Tosefta seems to imply there were two versions. One version had 18 blessings and included Yerushalayim and David as one, included David inside Yerushalayim. But if you want the other version of making them two separate blessings, that's also fine. So some kind of acknowledgement. The Tosefta is from approximately the time of the Mishnah, the second century CE, and it seems this distinction between the Nuschot was possibly either you say they were all saying only 18, combining the two together, or there was a possibility, what I just do, of of having them separate. And in the Yerushalmi also, in berachot, we have Rabbi Levi Shem Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina, Marom Ra'u Lismoch Mevarech Hashem L'Mekamis Nidchei Yisrael. Actually, he goes through the order of the blessings like the Gemara and Megillah that we're familiar with. And then he says, Shagrein B'Shatzrein B'Mitbach Miftach L'Tzadikim. At the last line, second last line, V'Shel David B'Bonei Yerushalayim. You include David in the prayer of Bonei Yerushalayim. Achayishu B'nei Yisrael Hashem Elokeim V'et David Malkam. Right, the blessing is, right, you should return to Israel, and then so based on the verse, that they will repent and come back and seek David. Amar B'Tanchum and then he goes on to the 15th bracha. Why is Shomea Tefillah after that? So the berachot here says that the two, David and Yerushalayim, are one blessing. I kind of am belaboring the point a bit, but I'm going to go. So when then was this? When would they become separate? I've already given away the answer that it's more not when but where. So Midrash Tanchuma, which is a later Midrash, I don't remember exactly, but maybe 10th century, 9th century. I mean, it's attributed earlier, but Rabbi Tanchum, but I think it's relatively late. It says there, but it's from Israel, right? Kol tisa avon v'kach tov, pasuk in Hosea. V'achshav ein bi'atenu ela tefillah. We don't have sacrifices anymore. We only have prayer. That's going to be the theme of my shiur next week. So the word there says kach tov, take good, and that refers to prayer. Tov b'gematria shvasrei, the gematria of the word tov is 17. Tet is 9, vav is 6, and bet is 2. So, but the Gemara says tefillah shasrei. We have 19 blessings in our Amida, not 17. Right? And it's learning the word tov to mean prayer. So you're right. Of the 19, there's the blessing of the heretics that was instituted in Yavna. And the prayer for Mashiach was established after Yavna, later than the prayer for the heretics, based on the verse, you can test me, God. So when was it established? Well, in Eretz Yisrael, the prayer for Mashiach was established after Yavna, after the prayer for the Velamal Shanim, which was implied in the earlier sources that said there were only 18 even afterwards. And the Mishnah says, Rabban Gamliel Omer B'chol Yom Yitpal Adam Shemoneh Esrei. Right, Rabban Gamliel lived in Yavne. In fact, he was the one who asked Shmuel HaKatan to compose the prayer of Velamal Shanim, and he says, B'chol Yom Yitpal Adam Shemoneh Esrei. Every day you pray 18 blessings. Now, if the Velamal Shanim was an added 19th, he would have said every day a person should pray 19 blessings. Of course, when we learn the Mishnah, we just translate it as 19 in our heads automatically. But if you look at the words in the person, it seems that he was saying 18 blessings. Rabbi Shua Me'ain Shemoneh Esrei. Rabbi Yehoshua says you don't say the whole 18, you say an abbreviated version of highlights of the 18. Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Akiva says it depends. If you know how to pray properly, do it properly. If not, do the short version. The short version is printed in many Siddurim, by the way, after the Amida. And so here is that version of that short prayer according to this is the Yerushalmi. This is Yerushalmi, not regular title. Yerushalmi. Rabbi Zera shlach Rabbi Nachum gabe Rabbi Yanai be Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Zera sent Rabbi Nachum to Rabbi Yanai to Rabbi Yishmael, and they said, Amalei ezo shva me'ein Shemoneh Esrei to Shmuel. Right, different grammar context, but what is the short version of the prayer? Basically, Amalei Havinenu. It's a prayer that begins Havinenu, Ritzei Tshuvatenu, Slach lanu go'alenu, Refei chol yenu, Berech shenotenu. If you look at this is the what we're going to say at the end is you say the first three and the last three blessings of the Amida is regular, and then the middle, instead of saying a whole bracha, you say a couple of words. So Havinenu, give us in place of Atachon Eladam Tat, Ritzei Tshuvatenu, right, is in place of I can't remember. Slach lanu, go aleinu, rafa'enu, and berech shenotenu, berech aleinu. Right, the Rav Chagai says what kinds of, if it's the sunny, rainy season or the wind or the summer season, which okay, I'm not going to go to the halach or the bavli, and then akim mfuzarim atam mikabetz v'toim alecha lishpot v'alushim tashit yadecha. Right, in gathering of exiles, justice, the wicked. וישמחו כל חסי בך בבניין עירך ובחידוש בית מקדשך. And may everyone rejoice in rebuilding your city and renewing the temple. כי טרם נקראת תענה, because before we cry you answer, that's שמע קולנו, כמה בטרם נקרא, etc., etc., ברוך השם שומע כל תחנוני. ברוך השם שומע תפילה. And then אומר שלוש ברכות ראשונות ושלוש ברכות אחרונות. Now, if you were paying attention, you'll notice that the blessing of Et Samech David is missing from this. We went from building Jerusalem to Shema Kolenu, and not even included with, left out completely, the blessing for Mashiach, which I think is interesting. And that's not the same as the Nusach. If you look at our Nusach in the Siddur, we do have, I've put in bold, right, we say, Tikunei Chalecha, and then Tzmichad Keren David Avdecha Arichat Ner Leveni Shaimesh Shichecha. We have quite a long phrase talking about Mashiach in the sprouting of the horn of David, your servant, and the kindling of the lamp of the son of Jesse, your anointed, in the Havinenu that we have today. So there was a version in Israel that left out Mashiach completely, and that's unusual. And Gemara Pesachim draws a contrast between the Amida and the Haftarah. So Amar Rabba Bar Shila, the Tzaluta in the Amida, when you're talking about David, Mashiach, you say Matzmiach Keren Yeshua, who raises the horn of salvation. The Haftarah, but when you're saying the Haftarah, the blessing about David is Magen David. Now, what's the difference between them? And I think I'm going to lead to perhaps why I think there was a difference between Israel and Bavel. Matzmiach Keren Yeshua, I think, describes a process. Begin the process of Mashiach coming. Whereas Magen David sounds like Mashiach is here, is waiting, is ready. Protect Mashiach, right? Or the shield of David, meaning this is a relevant now rather than a process for the future. Right, so it learns it from, I don't have to go through this, but the proof text of this, V'asita lecha Hashem gadol k'shem ha'gedolim, right? God promises David that he's going to have a great name like the patriarchs. Tan Rabbi Yossi says, Shomrim Magen David. Right, we say Magen David just like we say Magen Avraham in the beginning of the Amida. So we say Magen David in the blessings of the Haftarah. So I'll enter the section with the Tosfot read, and then happy to hear your thoughts, and I'll share my thoughts. Tosfot read, 13th century, 14th century, one of the Balei Tosfot, whose name I can't remember. So he writes on the Gemara Tanit, Afakav shitiken Shmuel HaKatan berachot habaitosim, even though Shmuel HaKatan added the blessing for the heretics, right? Lo hayu omrim ela Shemoneh Esrei berachot. They would only say a total of 18 blessings. Shayu kolim berachat David bebonei Yerushalayim, because they would include the blessing of David in the blessing of Yerushalayim. Kenatanya b'Tosefta berachot, like it said in the Tosefta that we saw. Aval Talmud shelanu, the Bavli Talmud, sover kenatani ba'hi baraita, holds like the other opinion in that Braita, that if you said Bonei Yerushalayim and Et Tzemach David separately, you fulfilled the obligation. And our custom is like the Babylonian Talmud. We make our Shemoneh Esrei has 19 blessings in it. Shel David b'fnei atzma v'shel Bonei Yerushalayim b'fnei atzma, like the Jerusalem by itself and Mashiach by itself. So it seems clear that in Bavel they had two separate prayers, like we have nowadays, and in Israel they only had one prayer, at least initially. Later on they added in another version, a second prayer for Mashiach. Why would this be the case? Why were there two separate versions of the Amida already as early as the 2nd century between the two different cultures and countries and nuschaot? So I'm happy to hear your thoughts. I didn't see anybody who says this explicitly, but nor did I dig too deeply into it. But I would suggest that in Bavel, under the Persian government, they were not worried about Jews praying for a Mashiach, especially Tzemach David, the process of Mashiach, a gradual process for Mashiach is going to come. That wasn't a threat politically to the Zoroastrians who were in control there. Everybody had their own beliefs and did their own thing. But in Israel, under Roman rule, especially in the early Christian period, where the belief in a Mashiach and the process of Mashiach was seen as a threat, a political threat, as causing upheaval, the rabbis were much more circumspect and didn't want to draw the wrath, the ire of the Roman Empire by praying for Mashiach to come. That's one version of the explanation. The alternative would be, we've just said a prayer against the Christians to say we're not like them, so it would not make sense to then say a prayer saying at Tzemach David, which in a way it's not in any way being Christian, but praying for the beginning of Mashiach is the reason people became Christians, right? Belief in the process of Mashiach, especially in the process of Mashiach, that it's not Mashiach isn't here yet, but we're in this path and he's going to show up any minute now. It's going to encourage more people to join the Christians. So that was a real issue in Israel in a way that wasn't perhaps in Bavel so much, and that's why I think there's this distinction between the two nuschaot. And only later on, when they were in Yavna, they were still worried about the Romans. When they went to Caesarea up north, not Caesarea, to Tveria, at some point later on, they were able to add in the prayer for Mashiach when there wasn't the same threat. So that's why I think there's two versions of the Amida, and that's why we've ended up now in our version. We have the David and Mashiach inside Bonei Yerushalayim, because that's how it was when there wasn't a separate bracha for David, and then when they separated them out, we ended up with the prayer for David as well. So we have this repetition, whereas the Yemenites and the Italians only said the prayer for Yerushalayim, and then when they added in the prayer for David, it was a separate. They didn't include one within the other, but they kept them. They had two separate blessings all the way along. Did I say that right way? Yeah. Anyway, so if you had them separate, you keep them separate. If you had them together, then when you separate them out, there's traces of that separation within the text of the blessing. Good. Okay. So we talk about Tzemach David and waiting for salvation. I just wanted to share this Gemara in berachot. This Gemara in Shabbat. Sorry, it's late. There's a verse which I forgot to include, which says, Emunat itecha, something, Yeshua techa, something. Reish Lakish learns it, I think. Reish Lakish learns it to refer to the 6 orders of Mishnah. Amar Rava. Rava learns it, these 6 ideas, not as the Mishnah, but as the future when one comes before, for judgment before God. So Amarav Bashar Shemachnisim Adam Ladin, when a person is brought before for heavenly judgment, he's asked 6 questions. Amrimla, you ask him, Nasata v'natata be'emunah, were you trustworthy in your business dealings? Kavata itim the Torah, did you set aside time for learning Torah? Asakta b'firi v'rivya. Did you try and populate the world? Tzipita l'shua. Did you look forward to salvation? Pilpelta b'chochma. Did you engage in wisdom? Vanta devar mitoch davar. And did you try and delve deeper and understand one thing from another? And then even after all that, I feel hachi irat Hashem hiyotzra in ilo lo. Even all that, if you also have fear of God, then you're in, and if not, you're not. So there's a mitzvah, or at least not a mitzvah. One of the test questions at the end of times will be Tzipita l'Yeshua. Did you look forward to salvation? If you've said the Amida et Semech David, then you can honestly answer, yes, I did. That was in my prayers every day. I look forward to Mashiach coming. So my question is, are we supposed to build the temple ourselves? When we say Bonei Yerushalayim, now maybe Bonei Yerushalayim just means rebuilding the city, right? And I guess this is why did the men of the Great Assembly, when they made this blessing, maybe they meant we've got a temple, although it was a pretty shoddy temple compared to the first temple. The people who saw what the men of the Great Assembly did, what the second temple started off, they cried. It's not the big Herodian temple that we're used to from the picture books and what have you. The first temple wasn't, the second temple originally wasn't all that exciting. But maybe the prayer was just to help us rebuild the city, repopulate the city. It's been destroyed. Maybe it's just as simple as that, which then morphed into, right, a desire to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, which is in that version from the Gaira Keniza. So I want to, is that our, can we rebuild Jerusalem? Yes, of course we can. Right, there's I don't know, a dozen cranes just down the road from me. They're rebuilding Jerusalem as well, not in the middle of the night, hopefully, but as we speak, they're rebuilding Jerusalem, and the old city is being rebuilt. And right, but are we supposed to rebuild the temple? When we pray to rebuild the temple, is it our job to rebuild the temple, or is this some kind of, well, sorry. Maybe it's our job to rebuild the temple because we're doing mitzvahs and that brings the temple and everyone lives happily ever after. It's all some spiritual thing. Yes, great. I agree. But are we also supposed to understand this as we should get our, bricks and mortar and whatever, nails and hammer and start building the temple when we say this prayer? What are we supposed to be thinking about? So there's a Gemara in Sukkah. You're probably familiar with this. It says, it also appears in berachot and in Pesachim. The Mishnah says, "B'rishona haya lulav nital b'mikdash shiva." Originally, the lulav was taken in the temple all 7 days. Or b'midah yom echad, and outside the temple only on the first day. Mishacharav beit hamikdash. Once the temple is destroyed, hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai shilulav nital b'midah shiva zeicher lemikdash. So Rabban Yochanan decreed that we should shake the lulav and etrog outside the temple also for 7 days as a reminder that that's what they used to do in the temple. That's not the piece of this that we need. He also made a decree yom hanef kolo asur, that the day of waving is entirely forbidden. Now you've got 5 words in Hebrew, and the Koren Steinsaltz translation takes up a whole paragraph. Basically, the new grain and the new wheat, barley, is forbidden to be eaten until after the Omer sacrifice has been offered. Omer, right, is a grain sacrifice. You can't have produce from the new year until after the Omer has been sacrificed. And the Omer sacrifice is brought on the 16th of Nisan, which is the second day of Pesach. And when the temple stood, they would be very zealous and hasty, and they would bring their sacrifice first thing in the morning. So you'd go to the temple, you'd see them bring the sacrifice, and you'd go home and make yourself a loaf of bread from the new produce. If you lived outside of Jerusalem, you could be sure that by midday at the latest, they'd already done the sacrifice because they would do it first thing in the morning. Along comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and says you can't have any of the new produce for the whole day of the 16th. You have to wait till the next day. Now, this doesn't really have such a practical application nowadays because most of us aren't using wheat during Pesach because we buy our matzahs before and don't touch them. But anyway, that whole day is forbidden. The Gemara says, why should that be? right? Why would he ban eating new produce for the whole day of the 16th? Sheyom Hanaf, my time, and what's the reason? Because Mehirayi B'nei Beit HaMikdash, right? Remember, these are decrees that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made after he escaped from Jerusalem. He saw the destruction of Jerusalem, came to Yavne, and he wants to remember the temple. So Mehirayi B'nei Beit HaMikdash, he wants to remind people to think that the temple should be rebuilt. Yomro, people will say, Eshtakad milachanu bar mizrach. Last year, right, I'm sorry, I've got to back up one more piece of information. If there's no temple, then you're allowed to eat the new produce from first thing in the morning on the 16th. If there's a temple, you have to wait until the offering is sacrificed. If there's no temple, you can eat it first thing in the morning. So Yochanan ben Zakkai says the temple will be rebuilt speedily. For Yom people will say, last year we ate the new produce as soon as it got light. So let's eat it again now, first thing in the morning. They won't know that last year there was no temple, but here's Mizrach, here when it got light, you were permitted to eat the new produce. But now the temple has been rebuilt. Omer Matir, you need the Omer, the sacrifice of the Omer, to be able to have the new produce. Now the Gemara says, but Dibnei Emat, what do you mean? You didn't know the temple was rebuilt? What are you doing? When was the temple built? If the temple was built on the 16th of Nisan, then Harei Hitir Mizrach means when dawn happened, there was no temple, so they're allowed to eat the new produce from the moment it gets light. Right? So must be the temple was built on the 15th of Nisan then, which is Pesach. Well, in that case, Machatzot Yom Lahalan Tishtari. From midday onwards, it should be permitted to Hatnan Harachokim Mutayin Machatzot Yom Lahalan. Right? We know if you live far away from the temple, by midday they've certainly done their Omer sacrifice. The Fishem Bedim Metatzlim Bot, they never waited more than midday to do the sacrifice. So when are you worried about the temple being? If it was built the week before, you will have heard the temple's been rebuilt. You'll know, and at any rate, you should only ban it until midday and not beyond. So why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ban it for the whole day? Must be that it was built overnight, meaning the night after first day of Pesach, second day in Chutz La'aretz, second day Yom Tov. Always built just before the end of Pesach, right? So now we have a problem, though, which is that you're not allowed to build the temple on Yom Tov, and you're not allowed to build the temple at night. So how could it have been built then? Amr Reb Nachman by Yitzchak Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'shita Rabbi Yehuda Amra d'Amra min haTorah hu asur, and he holds it is so he holds this blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I'm going to skip that line. So Rashi says, if we're talking about the temple being built on during Pesach, says Rashi Inami, Di'ibnei b'chameis samach l'shkiat hachama, v'hehi. Right, so meaning if it's at nighttime or the last thing just before Shkia on the 15th, the same idea. V'ei kasha de belayla eino nifne. If you're going to ask the question that we don't build the temple at night, Dekai Milan b'Shavuot, the Gemara in Shavuot says, Ein binyan beit mikdash belayla. You may not build the temple at night. Right, it says on the day that he set up the Mishkan. You also can't build it on Yom Tov. That building the temple does not override Yom Tov. Says Rashi, these rules only apply to a temple that will be built by humans, by people. Aval Migdash Atid, but the future temple, Shanu Mitzapin, that we're looking forward to, we're awaiting. Banuyu Mishuchlalhu, right? It's already built and it's waiting. Yigaleh V'yavo Mishamayim, it's going to be revealed and come down from heaven. Shneimah Migdash Hashem Kanani Yadecha, as it says in Shirat Hayam, the temple of God, your hands prepared. So Rashi says the first and second temples were built by humans, and we had rules about when you can and can't do it. But the third temple is going to be built by God. God can build the temple when He wants, He's not bound by the rules that you can't build a temple at night or you can't build a temple on Yom Tov. So according to Rashi, we do not have a mitzvah to build the temple. The third temple will be built, or is built already, sitting somewhere in some other dimension, and will be revealed and brought to down by God at a certain time. Tosfot basically says the same thing. I guess I don't have to read through the whole Tosfot. Well, why not? Why not learn a Tosfot? They wouldn't be able to prepare the Omer to go and harvest it in the beginning of the night. And they wouldn't therefore have time to go and offer it before midday on the 16th. Right? They'd have to start getting ready. Usually they'd prepare the whole thing before Pesach and they'd go out the night. But anyway, they wouldn't have time. יש מפרש במארי בערב יום טוב סמוך לשקיעת החמה ולא יכול לבקר ביום טוב מהיכן יקצרו את העומר. Or maybe it means on Erev Pesach, again, they won't have time to go and get ready beforehand, have all the pieces they need ready to go. Etc., etc. ויסמוך לשקיעת החמה ד-15 כמה שהוא יום טוב, האין בניין בית המקדש בתוכי יום טוב. So if we're talking about building it on the 15th before Shkia, you're not allowed to build the temple on Yom Tov, Kriya Perek Sheni to Shavuot, as it says in the Gemara in Shavuot, the wrong button. V'lav pirche, hey, that's not a question. So Tik Shilan, ha de kamrina lot shricha de ivne belayla. You can also ask why you're not allowed to build it at night. Hanami amrina hatam ein binyan beit hamish belayla. Ashne b'yom hakim et mishkan. Right. We can't build at night, only during the day. B'yom mekimin oto, belayla ein mekimin oto. We are forced to make a distinction, as Rashi did, that only refers to a temple built by people. But the future temple will be built from heaven. So Rashi and Tosfot agree that the third temple will be built not by us, but by God. And therefore, when we pray Bonei Yerushalayim, we're praying that through our prayers, through our actions, God will reveal the temple that He has built, not that we need help, buying the items, the things we need. Rambam, in contrast, has a whole book, a whole book about Beit Bechira, which is the instructions on how to build the temple. And he wouldn't have included that if it was something that only God needs to know. So Rambam and in his commentary in the Mishnah in Tamid, Tamid, says that we need to learn about the dimensions of the temple because there's a mitzvah to build the temple. And he writes in Hilchot Melachim, HaMelech HaMashiach Atid Lamod L'achzir Malchut David Liyoshna L'Memshelet HaRishona. Mashiach is going to come in the future from the house of David. He's going to re-establish the kingship, or Bonei HaMikdash, and he's going to build the temple, or Mikabes Nechei Yisrael, and he's going to gather the exiles. So Mashiach is going to build the temple, which means A, it is going to be humans who build the temple, and not going to plop down from heaven, and but B, that's not something we should do now because it's Mashiach who's going to build the temple and not us now. And here is support or the basis for Rambam that Mashiach will build the temple. Right? There's a verse, Hashem Arba Charashim. Zechariah says, God showed me the 4 craftsmen. Man Ninhu Arba Charashim. Who are these 4 craftsmen? Amarav Chana bar Bizna, Amarav Shimon Chasida, that's Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, Eliyahu, and Cohen Sedek. Right? The two Mashiach ben Yosef, Elijah the prophet, and the Cohen Sedek, the high priest. I think this is the only place in the Talmud that mentions Mashiach ben Yosef, but I might be wrong. Oh no, I'm completely wrong, because in the last paragraph Sanhedrin also mentions them. Never mind. So these are the 4 people. And Rashi explains the Charashim. These are the Umanim, the craftsmen, Mashiachim, Shnehem Charashim, Lebinyan Beit HaMikdash. The Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David are artisans to build the temple. So I don't know how Rashi explains that in contrast with what he wrote in Sukkah in 41a, that God will build the temple. But we see here that it's Mashiach's job to build the temple. He'll be the guy who does the building. In the Gemara Pesachim, this supports more the Rashi Tosfot view. Tanya Shiva Dvarim Nivru Kodim Shnivra Olam. There were 7 things created before the world was created. Elohim, they are the Torah, Tshuva, Gan Eden, Gehenim, Kisei Kavod, Beit HaMikdash, Shmo Mashiach. So the temple and the name Mashiach were created before the world was created. Presumably that's not talking about the first or second temples that were built, but must be the 3rd temple that was created as sitting in some other dimension, waiting to be revealed. However, in our Amida, we say at the very end after the Amida, Yiratzon Mifanecha Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Avotenu, Shebaneh Beit HaMikdash B'mihra V'yameinu, V'tenecha Elokeinu B'Toratecha. So on the one hand, we're asking for it to be built. According to Rashi, it already is built. It's sitting somewhere in another dimension. On the other hand, we are not saying that we're going to build it, or not asking to give us strength to build or help us to do it, but rather that it already is, should be rebuilt in our time, which implies maybe that God is going to build it for us. There's a lot of discussion amongst the Achronim about whether God will build the 3rd temple, or people will build the 3rd temple, or people will build the physical structure, God will build the spiritual structure, or some kind of combination between them. So anyway, I've highlighted some major opinions that say that that we are not supposed to build the temple because it will come from God. But as you know, there are also people who are actively working to rebuild the temple now. The Temple Institute is building the implements for the temple. You may have seen the gold menorah that is now on display in the old city, that is prepared and ready for the next temple to come. So the answer, when we pray, Uvnei Yerushalayim, are we supposed to be thinking that we're actively involved in building the temple? Maybe yes, and maybe no. There are different opinions. When is Mashiach going to come? That's kind of the wrong heading, actually. But even though it's a mitzvah to pray for Mashiach and to await Mashiach's coming and to believe Mashiach, not everybody is so excited about the idea of Mashiach. I gave a shiur a couple of years ago on WebYeshiva about waiting for Mashiach, which is, I think it's not a bad shiur. So you can go back and, if you can find it on the WebYeshiva website, it's not particularly good search function. I recommend you listen to that. But here's some examples, some cases of people that weren't all that happy about Mashiach coming. Amarav Ein ben David Bajit tit pashet malchut shel Yisrael tisha chodashim. The Mashiach won't come until the Romans will spread out through Israel for 9 months. Shneimar lachen yitnem ad yom et yoledet yelda v'yeter achav yishavun al bnei Israel. So we have to wait for the Roman conquest of Israel for 9 months, and then Mashiach will come. Amar Ola, yaiti v'la'it minei. Ola says, listen, I want Mashiach to come. That would be great, but I don't want to be around to see it. Ken Amar Rava, right? Rava, Ola, I don't remember. I think Ola was in Eretz Yisrael, but I'm not positive. Rabba was 2nd generation Amora in Bavel. He also said, yaiti v'la'it minei. Let Mashiach come, but I don't want to see him. I don't want to be around. Rav Yosef Amar Yaiti ve'izki de'itev betula de kufita de chamre. Rav Yosef said, let Mashiach come and let me merit to sit in the shadow of the dung of his donkey. I don't care what is going on. I want to be there when it happens. So there's different opinions about believing Mashiach coming is one thing. How much do we want to see him? So Abaye says to Rabbah, Rabba is Abaye's teacher. Amalei Abaye Rabba, my time. Why don't you want to see Mashiach come? If you're worried about the birth pains of the Messianic era, Hatanya Shalu Tamidavid Rabbi Elazar, Ma Yaseh Adam Yinatzel Mechevlo Shemashiach Yasak B'Torah Min Chasadim. Right? They asked Rabbi Elazar, what should a person do to avoid the birth pangs of Mashiach? And the answer is to learn Torah and do kind deeds, Gemilut Chasadim. And you've got both of those things, so you don't have to worry about it. And he says back, I'm worried maybe Yigrom Achet. Like we find in next week's Parsha, even though God has promised in this week's Parsha, promises Yaakov that he'll be with him, when he comes to confront Esav, Yaakov is still afraid because maybe he's done some sin that means he's no longer deserving. Rabbi Yochanan and Yisrael similarly said, Ken Rabbi Yochanan, Yaiti v'layit mani, let Mashiach come, but I don't want to see him. And then, the most peculiar view of all, Amr of Gedal Amarava, Tidin Yisrael, Da'achli Shnei Mashiach. The Jews are going to enjoy the time of the Mashiach in the future. Amr of Yosef Pshita. Yosef, of course they are. What do you mean? Chilak or Bilak? You think Chilak and Bilak, those guys are going to enjoy it, and we're not going to, Jews aren't going to enjoy it? Right? The reason Rav Gil said his statement is not to say the Jews will enjoy Mashiach, but that there will be a Mashiach. And he's to disagree with, in contrast to the view of Rabbi Hillel, Da'amar Ein Mashiach Yisrael Shkrach Luhu B'Yemei Chizkiah. Rabbi Hillel says there will be no Mashiach for Israel because we've already used him up, enjoyed that in the time of Chizkiah. He was the Mashiach, and there ain't no more Mashiach. So not everybody was looking forward to Mashiach coming, and not everybody believed Mashiach is coming, but we who live in a post-Rambam 13 Principles era definitely believe Mashiach is coming, and we look forward to Mashiach coming, and we pray for Mashiach coming. I just want to end with, who is Mashiach? Well, specifically, what's his name? Rabban Amrei Aha Malka Mashiach. So the rabbis of the Yerushalmi says, in terms of speaking about Mashiach, in min chayahu David Shmei, if he's someone who's alive, his name is David. In min demachyahu David Shmei, and if he's someone who's no longer alive, it's King David himself. Amar Rabbi Tanchuma, Ana Amrei Taima v'aseh ches Mashiach David. The reason of that is that the pasuk says he gives kindness, does kindness to his anointed one, David. So the Jews in Israel believed that David HaMelech was going to come back, that someone alive called David was going to be Mashiach, or David HaMelech was going to come back from the dead. And again, parenthetically, I think they're stressing it's King David, so you don't get confused by any false messiahs or any political upheaval caused by belief in false messiahs. However, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar Tzemach Shmo, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says his name is Tzemach. Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Ivo Amar Menachem Shmei. You're waiting for this, weren't you? Menachem Mendel. So Rabbi Yehuda says his name is Menachem, and Amar Chanina ben Rabbi Abau Lo Pligi. That's not a machloket, because the Chush b'nei Dahadin, Chush b'nei Dahadin, Ho Tzemach, Ho Menachem. Both Tzemach and Menachem have the same gematria, therefore it's the same person, and there's no disagreement. I'm going to run out of time, but anyway, this is a great story. Download the source sheet from this and read this story about this this rabbi who heard Mashiach, who heard both the temples destroyed and Mashiach was born, and went around to find this baby Mashiach. And the idea that Mashiach is born on the day the temple is destroyed, I think, is a very powerful and beautiful idea, but I'm not going to have time to go through this, so I'm going to skip. In the Bavli, in the Gemara Sanhedrin, I love this Gemara, because whatever, they here talk about what Mashiach's name is going to be. Mashma, so Tebei Rav Shilo, Amrei Shilo Shmei. The students of Rabbi Shilo said, Mashiach's name is Shilo, right? Of course, it's our Rebbe. Shneema Ad Kayavo Shilo. Ad Kayavo Shilo. Tebei Rabbi Yanai, Amrei, the students of Rabbi Yanai, guess what they said? Amrei Yanun Shemo. His name is Yanun, Yanai. Our Rebbe is the Mashiach. Shneema Yeshmo La'olam Lifnei Shemesh Yanun Shemo. Debei Rabbi Chanina. What did Rabbi Chanina's students say? Amar Chanina Shmo. Mashiach is going to be Chanina. Our Rebbe Shneema Asher Ten Lachem Chanina. V'yesh Amrim Menachem ben Chizkiah Shmo. Others say his name is going to be Menachem ben Chizkiah. Shneema Ki Rachak Mimenu Menachem Meshiv Nafshi. And the four names there of Shiloh, Menachem, Yenon, and Chananya. Chanina are the letters Mashiach, obviously. Amri Chavi, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to skip. Okay, fine. And in the Bavli, slightly differently, if he's someone who's alive, right? Imin Chayahu can go on Anna. If Mashiach is someone who's alive, it's someone like me. I could be a Mashiach. I'm going to skip to the end. Imin Matya, the last line. Manir joking on Daniel Ish Chamudot. If someone who's dead, it's going to be Daniel Ish Chamudot, which is not David Melech, and that's interesting. We're going to stop there because I'm going to run out of time. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Atida Kadosh Baruch Hu La'amid Lehem David Acher. Rav Yehuda says there's going to be another David in the future. It's going to be two Davids. Shenema Va'avdu et Hashem Elokehem ve'et David Malkam Asher Akim Lahem. Right? They will serve God and David their king, who I will establish for them. Hakim Lonim, I doesn't say I did establish him in the past. Akim, I will in the future. So there's going to be a future David. Amalei Rapapa Labaya Hakti David Avdi Nasi Lehem La'olam. So Rav Papa says, but doesn't the verse say, David, my servant, will be your prince forever? Kesar or Page Kesar. One is going to be the Caesar, and one is going to be the deputy Caesar. So there'll be an old David and a new David, a King David himself from the past, and a future present David who is going to be the king, who's going to be Mashiach. So when we say Etzemach David, Etzemach David, we can think about this idea. Amar Rav La Ivri Alma El David, the entire world was only created for the sake of King David. V'Shmuel Amar Moshe, Shmuel says the world was created for the sake of Shmuel. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar the Mashiach, the world was created for the sake of Mashiach. So we're talking about praying for the redemption, for the rebuilding, for Mashiach to come, and all that goes with that. And on that note, I will say good night. See you next week. I'm going to speak about Shomea Tefillah and Ritzei, which don't go together at all. And in fact, on Shabbat and Yom Tov, we don't say Shema Kohen, we do say Ritzei, but they're talking about prayer and sacrifice, and I'd like to discuss the interplay between the concepts of prayer and the concept of sacrifice. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.